In many ways, Bill Wilson was the stereotypical picture of a man in the 20th century. Very successful on the exterior in business. He was a man in the early 20th century who was wildly successful for a season, doing stock speculation. Bill Wilson knew how to buy and sell at opportune times. He could short stocks, is what we would say now, but he knew how to invest in things that would succeed. It was a gift that he had. What many did not know for many, many years is that Bill Wilson struggled with many things, not the least of which is that he struggled with depression. He struggled with a childhood in which his parents abandoned him, and he was raised by his grandparents. He struggled, as many men did of his generation, going off to World War I, and one can only imagine the atrocities that he saw and experienced during that time. But Bill Wilson also had what would become a very, very public struggle, at least by the end of his life, and what he became known for. Bill Wilson was an alcoholic. Many today know Bill Wilson more affectionately as Bill W., the man who's the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. He struggled with this disease, and what he was convinced of was that it had to be a disease, but a doctor had to help him sort of grow into this knowledge because in his generation, there were many people who struggled with things like alcohol, but we just assumed that they were moral failures, right? And even today, there are many taboo things about addiction that we continue to struggle with understanding. We just assume people are morally weak, or they're somehow a failure, or they weren't raised right, or whatever it may be. And we're only just now beginning to grow into the cusp of understanding that addiction, like many things in our society, is a biological disease. Some are more prone to it than others. There's even new science that I read this week that said that there are people who are beginning to believe that we are born with different levels of receptivity to dopamine receptors, that people who have more highly sensitive dopamine receptors are more prone to things like substance abuse. Because, imagine like let's take it out of substances, let's call it ice cream. Imagine how good you feel when you eat a bowl of ice cream. Someone with more sensitive dopamine receptors, sugar hits the same dopamine receptors that alcohol and drugs do, by the way. So imagine that bowl of ice cream tasting double or triple as good. There are people who are born with more sensitive, scientists are beginning to believe, more sensitive dopamine receptors, and therefore more prone to, whenever they touch addictive substances, that they are going to get hooked faster on it. But there's more to the disease of addiction than just biological things. There's psychological effects, cultural effects, all of these things. We're going to start a new sermon series during Lent that I'm going to finish on Easter Sunday, that we're going to walk through the 12 steps. This is what Bill Wilson and his comrades helped found with Alcoholics Anonymous. There are now many, many different versions of 12-step groups that exist in the world. Millions of people have literally had their lives changed by the 12 steps. But here's the thing. You don't have to be a person that struggles with substance addiction to need the 12 steps. In many ways, people who are struggling with substance addiction, once they begin to live into the 12 steps, they may even be among the first to tell you that in some ways they're lucky because they were desperate enough to know their lives needed to change, when so many of the rest of us never reach that point of desperation, and there's a part of us that lives our entire lives miserable. Father Thomas Keating says that human beings from birth pursue three things in life. We pursue security, we pursue power or control, and we pursue affection or approval. All human beings want to feel secure, they want to feel in control, and they want to feel loved, which are all reasonable things for human beings to want to feel. But the thing is that even from birth, no matter who you are, we begin to learn, like if you've ever driven a stick shift, there's like a give and a go with the gas and the clutch. Part of maturing into an adult, a healthy adult, is learning the give and go between seeking these things and not trying to seek them too much. Or sometimes you add to the layer of that the struggle that we have, that some people are born with more struggles in their life. Family brokenness, all kinds of issues that they have as kids that they're trying to overcome as they mature. All of these things help us kind of struggle with this give and go that's called maturing, which is saying what is a reasonable, healthy amount to seek security, power, and approval, And what's, a little too much of pursuing those three things? Which is interesting that Father Thomas Keating says that security, power, and approval are the three things that all human beings seek, because guess what? So does the Gospel of Matthew. Our text today, which is the traditional text to begin the Lenten season, Jesus goes to the wilderness of life. Many of us may feel like we live in a wilderness sometimes, and it's true. There he fasts and prays for 40 days, which is a holy number in Scripture. But you can imagine he's feeling tired. He's feeling a little weak maybe. His human form is feeling frail after living in the desert. And we're told that he is tempted 3 times. 3 times he is tempted with very unique temptations. One, we're told that go to the top of the steeple and jump off, and the angels will grab you and you won't get hurt. That's the pursuit of security and comfort. You can do this, don't worry about it. One is told, turn the stones into bread. We can have comfort, we can have power, we can have control. We don't need help with things. A third temptation. You see the kingdoms of the world? They can all be yours. That's the pursuit of approval. You want to be loved by everybody? Here's your chance. All human beings struggle with what it means to pursue power, security, and affection. And here's the good news of Lent. Jesus knows that struggle too. It's not so much that Jesus goes, and we tend to tell this story that he goes and he overcomes temptation because he's some kind of morally superior whatever. It's that Jesus intimately knows what human struggle is about. This whole season of Lent leads us to the point where Jesus knows what human struggle is about, ultimately unto death. It's not so much that Jesus is better than us or stronger than us, as much as he's one of us. The incarnation of God in human form. You struggle in life, you feel lonely, you don't feel loved, so did Jesus. What good news that is. That in the worst moments of our life, we can know that we're not alone because God is with us. We talk in Lent about this notion of sin. And sin's one of those scary words. It's a 3-letter word. It might as well be a 4-letter word in the church, right? It's a dirty word, sin. We don't like to talk about sin. But sin, I really think we need to understand this notion of sin in better ways. Too often, throughout church history, we have talked about sin in ways that are moral failings. If you sin, you let God down. You let someone else down. You're a failure, and we wag our finger just like this in the church. It's not so much that sin is about moral failing as much as theologian Richard Rohr says that sin is about a disease that all human beings have. There's not a sinless one among us. Now, some of us pretend like we might be some days, but I got bad news for you. So we all carry this chronic disease called sin, which is just human frailty and brokenness. And we all struggle with temptation, which is what is the right amount of power, security, and affection that we need, and when do I get so selfish that I want more than what I really need? How do I understand what temptation is about? Temptation and sin are also important to note that it's not so much about how you fail or succeed in life. Often, sin and temptation are about how you understand who you really are and who you are not. Because one of the things that we learn in our maturation process of learning healthy amounts of power, security, and approval that we need in life is we also learn to do things to protect ourselves. We put on masks. Because God forbid anybody see us for who we really are, because we're not sure that's the person that we want them to see or know. What if that person's not loved or lovable? What if that person isn't talented enough? What if that person isn't strong enough? What if that person isn't fill in the blank enough? And so we pretend to be different things to fit in. That's how we feel security also, because we want to fit in. It's important during the season of Lent that we name sin for what it is. that Christ knew temptation, and that is, who are we and who are we not? It's not so much that Jesus is so morally superior that he didn't give in to temptation. Jesus knew who he was. And so when the tempter gives him these offers, turn the stones into bread, go be the king of the whole world, all these things, he doesn't have to give into it because that's not who he is. And I don't know about you, but there have been times in my life when I've struggled with really knowing who I am. And I get exhausted playing different roles for different people. All kinds of roles we take on: mother, father, friend, worker, manager, volunteer, pastor, church member. And those roles are fine, except if we forget who we really are at our core, then we begin to lose the essence of God's presence in our life. We lose what it means to be fully alive because we don't know what it means to know ourselves fully. That's what Lent is all about, all this self-examination stuff. It's not so much about guilting yourself as knowing yourself. And so we look at these 12 steps. Talk about the first two briefly. Step one, Bill Wilson and his friends helped us know, is that we admit that we are powerless, that our lives have become unmanageable. Now, for people in rooms of recovery, for whatever 12-step program it is, you're powerless over, and you fill in the blank, whatever it is, alcohol, food, drugs, whatever it may be. But one of the fundamental truths of life I hope you walk away with today is this: we are all powerless over something. Everybody. I loved what Dawn said about the kids in the children's sermon. I wish I could say we worked on this in advance, but it was like a God thing that she did this whole thing. You think you're in charge of something, but you remember the moral? But you're not really truly in charge. God is. And we cover up for our powerlessness because that means admitting a vulnerability that's scary. Nobody likes to be vulnerable. That makes us shiver. And so we cover up our powerlessness with a variety of things. Some do substances, okay? And people who are more prone to it, it catches quicker. And that's a struggle in and of itself that is very hard to break. But there are other powerless expressions of powerlessness that we need to know. Some of us work too much, and we want to feel important, and we want the world to know that we're the hardest workers there are around. And deep down, the reason we want to know that is we are so afraid that you won't think that we're what? Strong or productive or enough if we don't tell you how much we work. Others of us want to control other people. Now, you may not think that, and you may need somebody to help you think that, but people who tend to want to control other people don't really see it for a little bit. But we tend to want to control each other. If you don't believe me, think of the person in your life who tends to tell you everything that you do wrong and how you can do it better. And if you can't think of that person, you might be that person. And sometimes we want to control other people because if we have to look within ourselves, it hurts too bad. So as long as I can focus on you, I don't have to look at me. See, this is the thing about addiction and the 12 steps. We tend to think of, the 12 steps in addiction as like, oh, well, so-and-so's an alcoholic, so-and-so's a drug addict, so-and-so's a whatever, And those just tend to be a little bit more, once, people say it publicly, they're a little bit more outwardly known expressions of powerlessness, but we all struggle with them. And one of the great fears we have in life is that, God forbid, somebody, sometime, somewhere is going to find us out. That we're not as smart as we want you to think we are, or as strong, or as whatever it is. And so we work and we work and we work until exhaustion, trying to make you think we have power over things that we do not. One of the ways we can begin to grow into who we really are as God's people, as the people God made us to be, is to know that the path toward healing begins with admitting our brokenness, to tell the truth, to pull back the layers, to be honest, about who we are and what we struggle with and how we struggle with it. And that's hard to do, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it takes a lot of time. And one of the beauties of things like 12-step programs is that they kind of come alongside you with three different ways. One is that you have the steps themselves. Another is that you have a sponsor, someone who's going to really intensely come alongside you. And a third way is that you go to meetings, and in those meetings you talk with other people who have the same struggles as you. And somehow together you can laugh, you can cry, you can share. And in the midst of all of that, God's healing work can take hold in your life. But it starts by telling the truth. All human beings by nature are addicted to something. The question is just what? And does that, whatever it is, get in the way of our relationship with God? Does it keep us from being the people God made us to be? Step 2, once we've admitted our powerlessness, that our lives are unmanageable, we then have to come to know who is really in control. That only a power greater than us can restore us to sanity. When you're in a 12-step program, you literally say, I'm insane. You say, that's not nice to say. Well, here's the thing. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and over, expecting a different result. Anybody who's in a room of recovery will tell you, I drank and drank and drank, expecting it to not be as bad the next day, and guess what? It always was, sometimes worse, or drugs, or whatever it may be. So if the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over and over again, expecting a different result, then maybe we need to finally, in admitting our brokenness, also admit that only a power greater than us can restore us to sanity, which is a wonderful way of saying you can't fix yourself. Now, we've already said you can't fix other people, so stop trying on that. But you can't fix yourself by yourself either. You need help. And that's where God comes in. The tempter gives Jesus all of these very individual, self-propelled, self-powered ways of being strong, being secure, being loved. And Jesus isn't just quoting Scripture back at him, in this cliche way. He's giving you a glimpse of who he understood himself to be, which is that it's not about me, it's about the Father. I can say no to this not because I'm so good at this, but because God powers him. God empowers him to understand that it's only a power greater than yourself that can restore us to sanity. Only a power greater than ourselves can heal us. That's the work of Lent, the journey to the cross. To know that salvation is not something you earn. It's not something you merit. It's not something you create in a laboratory in your garage, or it's not something that you work hard enough for. It's not something that you concoct on your own. Salvation comes from God. Plain and simple. And we all carry within us brokenness. And until we tell the truth about that brokenness, we'll never get to that next step of saying, if I don't admit my brokenness, then how will I ever know that I'm not the one who can fix me? Which is to say, once I can admit that we've all got problems, then I can begin to understand what it means to ask God into my life to help me grow, to heal me. I know this. In many ways, not just in cliche ways because I'm a preacher, or not just in cliche ways because, I do all this Sunday preaching thing. I know this in my own life because I'm a person who's 14 months in recovery myself. And it takes a lot to face those things in your own life. Believe me, I know. But I cannot describe to you the freedom that begins to take hold when you finally say, I don't have my life all together. And that's okay. And I don't have to fix all of my problems myself. Now, some days I still try. But that's okay too. And one day at a time, We lean on God. One day at a time. We right-size ourselves, that we're not the most powerful beings in the world and we're not the most miserable creatures there's ever been. We're just us in our own skin, made in God's image and truly loved by God. Loved right where you are. Right where you are. There's a trailer on Apple TV of a new show or movie or something. I'm going to forget the name. One of you will tell me after church. It's based on a children's book. It's like the boy, the horse, the owl. There's all these animals. It's this epic journey. It's beautifully illustrated. There's a children's book about it. It's a wonderful book. But there's in the trailer, there's this line that has stuck with me now for a couple of weeks. The boy asks the horse, who's the wise sage in the group. He says, "What's the bravest thing you've ever said?" What's the bravest thing you've ever said? To which the horse answers, "Help. I've asked for help." Maybe the bravest thing we can do this Lenten season is ask for help. And I promise that when we do, God will be there. Because God has never left us. God will never leave us. What a journey this will be. Thanks be to God. Amen.